You're listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iverson and Victor Vigiani.
Welcome to NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we explore the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. With me today, as always, he is Victor Vigiani.
He is Chris Iverson. Great to be with you, Chris.
Great to have you here, Victor. This is an exciting time for us to be involved in the areas of phenomenology and exopolitics and how ufology ties into all of that. We've had a great run of guests here, and we have another huge heavy hitter here in this world with us today with Mr. Stephen Bassett, activist, lobbyists, man on the mission, and has been on the mission in Washington, D.C. for quite some time, representing all of us and doing that which is necessary to help drive this entire process forward. Can't say enough about him and how happy we are to have him here with us today. We also have with us, as always, is our distinguished group of international correspondents. Starting with from Peru, we have Giorgio Picenza, who has been involved with this now for decades. His research, his writings, his appearances at various conferences and conventions has been invaluable to us all. Additionally, we have Kathleen Martin. Kathleen is an expert in the area of abduction research, has spent countless hours working with people who have been involved in abductions and have experiences. Following that is Manuel Lamiroy, who is one of the founding members of the international exopolitics community, who has a tremendous background in everything from intelligence to law to research to writings, to the development of, he has an Exopedia page that is wonderful background and information for us all. And then finally to Francisco Mirao Correa, live from Porto, Portugal, who is with us, who has such brilliant insight, has been a contributor in magazines, in conventions, speaking engagements, and bring some intelligence to that which we want to talk about here today. So thank you all for a very distinguished group of international correspondents for being here with us as we have the honor of having Steve Bassett with us live from Washington, D.C.
It's a great way to introduce things, Chris. Thanks very much to you for outlining the expert international correspondence that we have. And this is kind of a first for us. And I think actually in podcast history, we've never really had or seen this kind of treatment with expert guests with respect to having panelists on and providing a diverse perspective on the UAP issue. And we hope that this kind of treatment will give a broad perspective to the general public that we're going to be marketing this towards, and hopefully gain an understanding of what the broader issues are. And just to bear with us, and I'm going to read Steve's bio. I've known Steve since way back before 2005 when he was here in Toronto with the Honorable Paul Hellyer at the University of Toronto. And Steve and I go back to times with interviews on the radio with Strange Days Indeed with Errol Bruce Knapp. I'm sure Steve remembers that. In any case, Stephen Bassett is the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, founded in 1996 to end the government-imposed embargo on the truth behind the so-called UFO phenomenon. Steve has spoken to audiences around the world about the implications of formal disclosure by world governments of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. He has given over 1,000 interviews on radio and television, and PRG's advocacy work has been extensively covered by national, international media. In 2013, Steve produced the citizen hearing on disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. That ran from late, I guess, April to early May. And then on November the 5th, 2014, PRG launched the Congressional Hearings Political Activist Initiative, seeking the first hearings on Capitol Hill since 1968 regarding the extraterrestrial presence. So with that, and I won't belabor any more of an introduction, welcome, Stephen Bassett. Great to have you with us.
Victor, yes, of course. My friend and colleague, it's nice to be with all of you.
Yeah. Let's start off where I think I'm going to call it a benchmark in history. I'm not sure how far down the historical perspective will go or how far back it will go, but I have been convinced since I sat at my table in that Washington Press Club for 5 days in a row, witnessing what you did and bringing together all of the witnesses and the former congressional representatives and one senator. You brought forward probably one of the most incisive, specific, and informative gathering of people who know about the UAP issue. And, in terms of the citizen hearings, how do you reflect back on that with respect to its place in history?
Well, the citizen hearing was a logical step in the disclosure process, or the disclosure movement, which is what the disclosure process became eventually. And I was a project that I had considered and wanted to do as early as 2002, maybe. I just didn't have the funding, as I knew it was going to cost a great deal of money. So finally, that kind of funding came about late 2012 and put it together. So the idea had been germinating for a long time. It was pretty fully formed and just launched into it to create a mock congressional hearing in a powerful setting with real former members of the House and Senate, and with a very large array of witnesses over a period of days, which, in my opinion, was very much how the actual hearings, when they begin, will take place. Only even more committees, frankly, and perhaps over a longer period of time. The press club in Washington, D.C. was chosen because of its location, 2 blocks from the White House, and the huge ballroom. Very expensive, but put it there. And we brought in 42 total witnesses, and they were put into groups of 3 or 4 to speak on certain topics. So there were, like, I think 4 topics each day, 4 or 5 days, like 20. So it was extremely expensive, and it was all filmed in high quality, and it was streamed. So it was a mock congressional hearing, streamed live. Members of Congress or journalists could watch it live if they so chose. It was filmed. A DVD record was created of it, 30 hours, to be used as we went forward. So it was a major project. And up until that point, it was, I think, the most significant disclosure event up to that point. And I didn't have any serious expectations that the citizen hearing on disclosure itself would somehow trigger a major sea change in the White House and or Congress and develop into disclosure at the time. I didn't expect it. I hoped to get as much media coverage as possible. And we did get some media coverage, but again, it was just a step towards where we're soon going to arrive. It was a pleasure to do, and again, the record of it exists and can be citizen hearing. I'm sorry, at the citizen hearing, is it citizenhearing.org? I think citizenhearing.org is where you can still acquire the DVD sets and so forth. So that's how I feel about it, and I think it was important, but it was just a step on the way. The big event that will surpass the citizen hearing disclosure, I can assure you, is coming.
Yeah, well, that's great. And having been there for the 5 days, and all the announcements that were made with respect to the media and some of the powerful witnesses that you brought forward. And as I might sort of add, the controversy surrounding Robert Salas and Congressman King about the little difference of opinion that they had about how Robert Salas interpreted the UFOs over nuclear installations, which we'll get into later on. That kind of stuff it did make headlines, and I would consider what you did once again a benchmark. And if anything does happen in the future, I kind of think, Steve, that what you did will provide a template for what might go on with respect to the political aspects to that. And I know that, Chris, you have a question too.
Yeah, I mean, first, just a statement from myself is that when this did occur, I know with you being involved in this for as long as you did, Stephen, that it might not have seemed, as you just said, such a big event, and that there's more that's coming. To me, and I think to many in the phenomenon and ufology community, it was a seminal event. I was shocked when it was put together and it came out there, and it was beautiful and wonderful to see the publicity that happened with it, to see that, you know, at least parts of it showed up on C-SPAN. The coverage for me, and I think for many, the first time was a non-giggle factor approach. And I think, you know, kudos go to you for how it was laid out, how it was set up. As you indicated, it was a mock congressional hearing. It was done just as a congressional hearing would be conducted. So it's a subject matter that was treated with all of the seriousness and respect that it is due. As we all know, that there is so much that is behind all of this. Now, as you said, you're looking at something much bigger that's coming, and we'll get to that. When you first did this, one of the first things that I thought about was you had a list of 43 people, as you indicated, you brought forward. I take it you probably had to cull down the overall list of folks that you had just to come up with 43. But there was a mix at that time of professional researchers, we'll call it that, along with people in business and military. How did you look at that? How did you come up with the groups that you were looking at? And were people approaching you to put this together? Were people anxious to tell their stories? I mean, it sure looked to me as being at that point in time an observer of it, that what really struck me was that several of these people very much appreciated having this opportunity to step forward and in a very official manner tell their stories.
Yeah, let me, the key aspects of this event were, one, there had never been a mock congressional hearing, period, never happened on this subject. So that was important. There had never been this many witnesses in one place involved in a project. A lot of this came out of the fact that I'd held 6X conferences in the Washington area previously, 2006 to 2010, or 2004 to 2010. And I had 30 some speakers at the first one, and then 2018. So I had been bringing people to speak. So I had a familiarity with a broad range of individuals, witnesses, researchers, and so forth. So that helped. I think I started with about 70 potential witnesses. And there were some that I really wanted that just didn't happen. I had also a pretty good idea of the areas that I wanted to bring forward. So there were some people in the field who were, you know, highly qualified people, I have great respect for, but they were not invited to it because I wanted to stay within certain genres. And so there was a connection there. But clearly, perhaps the most important thing was that by providing an appropriate honorarium, a substantial honorarium, was able to have 6 former members of Congress, 5 House members and 1 senator, be on the panel. That had never happened, and at all. No, it never happened. And there was 6 of them. So it really was a mock congressional hearing. And I didn't train them in any way. None of them had a specific bias toward the issue, but they were individuals that I felt comfortable would be good panelists. I had a few that turned down the offer, but they gave us a full week of their time. And I mean, it was hard work. Some of them said they never worked that hard in a hearing situation. They never had. It went all day, 5 days, and they were each paid $20,000, plus they had all expenses and so forth. So that was important. Why? Because ultimately the goal of this whole project was to show members of Congress, their staffers, what it would be like. What would happen if you were to actually hold hearings on Capitol Hill on this subject, and people such as were presenting that week appeared before you. And there was no guarantee how it would go. And I knew that they knew how to handle themselves in hearings. I knew that they knew how hearings went. So they just pretty much did what they do. I didn't have to tell them much of anything, really. And they did a fantastic job. It was serious. And they went down in history as far as I'm concerned. So that was the fundamental goal, to show what hearings would be like. Now that was 7 years ago, approaching 8 years ago. And I really did not think that the real hearings would be that far in the future. The plan was to get hearings pretty quickly. I had a plan for that, and didn't quite go as I hoped, but 8 years on, it's good. It's good enough for me.
Here we are. I mean, it's obviously it's going to be coming, and it's wonderful to look forward to it. You brought up here the significance, of course, of these ex-members of Congress who had participated in this. And to me, the other stunning thing that occurred during this was the number of people with military backgrounds who had come forward and spoken outwardly about this. And this is something that all of us here have spoken about many times. In fact, Giorgio has, one of our international correspondents here introduced to you earlier, has spoken to several people on the international military stage with backgrounds and who have come forward in their own countries to speak out about that. And I was wondering, Giorgio, from your perspective and the people that you've talked to in the military, questions that you might have for Stephen here, comments regarding the interface that you have had with members of the international military community and how this might play forward with the hopefully 2021 hearings coming up.
Well, certainly, yes. For example, in Peru, Uruguay, Chile, it all depends on the top brass, in the general commander and other top brass attitude towards this. If they are open to the subject, everything opens immediately to the subject. Everybody falls in line. And this is something that makes me think, what's going on here in the US? Who is supporting the TTSA confirmation of an extraterrestrial, or let's say UAP, an intelligent presence associated with it? If there are these reports that intelligent agencies are going to surrender around March of next year, and we have possibly hearings after that, what faction of the military establishment will be, let's say, promoting this situation? That's a question I have for Stephen, because what I saw in Peru is that it's very important who is the top dog controlling this situation. And will it be a pro-democratic or an authoritarian type of disclosure, controlled disclosure? What do you think, Steve?
And this is complicated. Military witnesses have always been key to the disclosure process for obvious reasons. First, the ET issue from a political standpoint is fundamentally a national security matter. That's obvious, I think, to most people. Military witnesses also have gravitas. So, and they're government, they work for the government. So anything that comes from the mouth of a military person is very important. But all militaries, with few exceptions, I think, in the world, serve the head of state of that country. And the head of state is their commander in chief. So they can't just go out on their own. They can't promote. They're very limited. And so what clearly we've seen over the last 70 years is that people who are actively serving simply do not very rarely speak to this issue, certainly on their own. So the witnesses, by and large, tended to be individuals who are no longer serving. And even then, we know that they had limitations. The more significant information they might have, the more likely it was classified. The more likely there was a non-disclosure agreement. And so what the totality of global militaries know about this subject is vast compared to what those who have left government service have been able to say. But what they have done is significant. And so as you go back in time, military witnesses have been very important. One of the earliest examples of this was Donald Keogh. Donald Keogh was a Marine Air Officer, Major. He served before World War II. And after, when the events took place, as we know of 1947 Roswell, he eventually became convinced that it actually was true. And so he wrote a book called Flying Saucers Are Real, 1950. So he was one of the earliest witnesses and also earliest, I could say, exopolitical activists, because he essentially was trying to pressure the military to come forward and tell the truth. So that's disclosure. That's a disclosure process. He was a disclosure activist, one of the first, and a military witnesses. Now, Major Keogh also was a writer of pulp fiction and some sci-fi stuff. That he started doing that after he was injured and had to leave the service. And so so his first major article was in True Magazine, which was extremely well read. But he was in that genre, so it took a little of the edge off. But he was one of the first. And as we go through time, occasionally someone connected to the military would involve themselves in this issue. As things picked up in the aughts from 2000 on, the presence of military witnesses increased, and they were approached by activists in the field, documentarists, to bring their stories forward. Leslie Kean and James Fox did that in 2007. Robert Salas and Robert Hastings did that in 2010. I did it in some of the X conferences where some military witnesses were there. And so it slowly developed. But again, in terms of what the actual former militaries were doing was another matter. Now, in some countries, you found a little bit more formal involvement, particularly down in South America for whatever reason. Peru, Brazil, Chile. In Europe, not so much. United States, not so much. So where things are going now, what happened in 2017, 4 years after, a little more than 4 years after the citizen hearing on disclosure, is that the United States military, or the military intelligence complex, entered into this in a fairly substantive way, but not directly. They did it by, it happened such that members of the military intelligence complex, retired or had just left service, formed an organization to address this issue. And they are acting, a sense, as a proxy for, I think, the military intelligence complex itself, but not the entire complex. They are acting as a proxy in a way for all of those within the military intelligence complex in the United States who favor disclosure and may have for some time, meaning they feel personally it's time for this information to be revealed to the world and certainly the American people. But as active serving military under the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, they simply cannot act independently or on their own on this. And so an organization called the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science emerged, formally launched in October of 2017, but it actually emerged in 2016. Or what, I mean, this way, the development of it was in 2015, 2016, and we began to learn that something was coming in 2016. But we did not know the details and the individuals that would be part of it until they actually launched 2017, though we did know that somebody very important and involved in that group, we knew about that person early, and that was Tom DeLonge. So we knew that, but we did not know the details until 2017. So that so what you have is a sort of logical, natural progression through the years that has taken far longer than it should have, I believe, my opinion. But nevertheless, it is moving forward to the next step, and the next step is the one that we've been trying to achieve in every way possible: documentaries, books, conferences, lectures, the citizen hearing, and press conferences, and so forth, for a long time. And it's taken, well, 70 years really, since Keogh wrote his famous book, Flying Saucers, and asked that
it's really taken some time. It's been amazing to see it come to this point. It is nice to see, as you said, the TTSA come together with this, with its collection of private citizens, ex-military, ex-government, quite a few scientists involved. The intelligence community has been involved with it. There are people working on it behind the scenes. I know some of the things that have first come out from them have been more of the classic introduction to what is out there. For instance, the gun sight footage from several years ago that came out, that led to the so-called Tic Tac. But there's been quite a bit of information that they have discussed that has not been as much publicly brought out there and discussed. And in fact, one of those I know has to do with an area that Kathleen is very involved in and has been for quite some time, which is what has been going on regarding a very personal aspect of the contact that has gone on and what has happened, which has to do with the experiencer and abduction phenomenon that has occurred and why these things have gone on. So Kathleen, I know you were very interested in asking Steve about that.
Yes, and Steve, you founded the Paradigm Research Group 24 years ago, nearly 25 years ago. You've been at this a very long time and have been a major voice in the disclosure movement. And in the time frame, more recently, our level of knowledge regarding UAPs and contact has increased. And we have recently, as was stated, experienced a tiny degree of soft disclosure. What level of disclosure do you believe the world's population can tolerate? And what impact do you think that disclosure will have?
Let's give our audience a bit of background here, though. We're using terms that some people seeing this may not be familiar with. Disclosure is a key word here, and that is with a capital D, disclosure, which is one of the most important things that PRG is accomplished, is to try to make the idea of the event, a disclosure event, common knowledge, to put it into the intellectual space. And the event in question is the formal confirmation of the extraterrestrial presence, which is what people have been calling for 70 years. A head of state announces to their citizenry that the extraterrestrial presence is in fact real. Not UFOs are real, that's a tautology, but extraterrestrial presence, non-human intelligence from other planets are real. That would be obviously global within days. And logically, other heads of state would confirm it. And they would provide some evidence to support this. Not that there isn't enough evidence already out there, but there would be some formal presentation of information or evidence that would confirm and back up this statement. This is what disclosure with a capital D is. And it pleases me to see that turning up everywhere, Facebook and Twitter, in the media, and elsewhere. It will be the most profound event in human history. It's a big deal with massive implications for just about everything you can imagine in our society, our global society, which is why the announcement is been hard in coming. Because when something has that level of implications, then there's so many institutions that are going to be affected by it. There's naturally great concern that what will happen, what will transpire if it takes place. And there are a lot of people that have stepped forward to prevent disclosure from happening. In other words, they just didn't feel it was the right time. They were concerned about what would happen, etc. It's that big a deal, you're going to have that much resistance in a sense. So that's disclosure. The disclosure process, small d, is that entire process for 70 years in which information is being dug out, presented. Whether it's research, whether it's interviews, whether it's some testimony, whatever. And that has been primarily a citizen science research effort. The government's not doing that. The universities are not doing that. It's just people like you, Kathleen, Victor, and myself, and our colleagues. 70 years. That's the disclosure process. So we've got that. And the matter of how disclosure itself is very simple. I mean, and a head of state simply states to the people, hey, there's extraterrestrials here. Sorry we took you so long to tell you. And that's fine. That's it. It's over. So your question is really referring to, and also Chris's question is referring to the post-disclosure world. What that starts 1 second after that announcement comes out of the mouth of a head of state. Doesn't have to be our president. It could be any number of presidents. That's this post-disclosure world. Now that is a vast subject. How will it be received? What will be how will the press deal with it? What is the government willing to discuss going forward? How much resistance will there be to getting deeper classified files and information about any number of classified projects? And of course, how will religion deal with it? And so forth. I mean, this is just a vast subject, which I'm looking forward to being involved in. But we could spend hours talking about that. I can only say that we will learn. Let me put it this way. I have a catchphrase that I use. And when disclosure takes place, no, actually, let me put that aside. All I can say is that we, the people, should have and will have, and PRG is certainly going to try to help have, as large a role as possible in the post-disclosure world. In other words, 1 second after that announcement comes out of the mouth of a head of state, what the people decide to do is going to be extremely important. How are we going to react? What demands are we going to make? What are we going to tell our politicians? How responsive we're going to be to the ideas and so forth. And we need to be involved in that. Otherwise, the current institutions of government will deal with it as they please. And that's not acceptable. So that's the way I think to look to what to expect and so forth. It's for me, it's mostly about how much input are we, the American people and the world's people, going to have? And of course, how that plays out and how the government reacts, well, it's an incredibly complex process to analyze.
Think, Steve,
It'll
yeah,
hopefully work out.
yeah, Steve, what you're talking about and what you're doing, and as I'm listening to you, as I always do, very carefully, what you're doing is you're providing a tutorial here, and I think that our viewers, some who have a very fundamental, basic understanding of what this issue is all about, and they hear you, they understand what you're saying. However, there is a segment of society that literally has no idea what we are talking about.
That's right.
So that's a fundamental fact. And I think what we are doing here today, and what you've just sort of in your response to Kathleen, is you're providing a tutorial for people who really don't grasp or haven't even heard of this issue. And when you mentioned institutions earlier, one of the quote unquote institutions that I feel has played a really major role in all of this is the concept of exopolitics. And I'm not sure exactly when it started, how it started, or how it's defined, but I know one of our correspondents, Manuel Lamoureux, has some very distinct views and actually teaches about this whole issue with his courses on exopolitics. So Manuel, I know you've got a question for Steve regarding exopolitics.
As you just said, ufology is actually, it's a thing of the past. It still focuses on gathering evidence, mainly on lights in the sky, and it ignores all the far more important questions with regard to the implications of an extraterrestrial intelligence engaging us, with regard to how governments have responded as they did with the truth embargo. How are we going to prepare for post-disclosure world? All of these were topics that are being discussed in exopolitics. Now, there is a bit of a schism in exopolitics at the moment, where some of the people involved tend to prioritize conspiracy theories, where all of us here prefer the more fact-based things that focus on the more important matters, like educating people and preparing for close disclosure world. You've been involved in exopolitics too for at least 15 years now. How do you see the future of exopolitics and its role in this disclosure process?
Exopolitics comes into play in the early aughts, and it's again another language issue. Because for those that were pursuing political resolution of this issue, which is why I got into the field. That was the intention from the beginning. I did not get into the genre to become a researcher, to go out and study cases. I got into to resolve the issue politically because I'd concluded that the problem was not science. It simply wasn't a scientific problem anymore. There's always science to be done. That's great, and I want that research to continue. But a great deal had already been done, and the problem was the resolution then of this work was blocked by the government, and that was a political decision. The embargo was a political decision. By the way, the truth embargo is another language issue, which I put forward early on to replace UFO cover-up, because UFO cover-ups totally is an inappropriate term. It's got the UFO in it, which is bad enough, but then it says cover-up, which implies that the government's decision to withhold this information was illegal, and that all of the national security people involved were criminals. And that's not true. And that's not wise to criminalize the people you're trying to reach. So UFO cover-up. So for those of us engaging the political side of it, and there is a huge political side to this, what's the term we use for that? Well, you could say that you are a political activist dealing with the extraterrestrial issue, and the field is politics. It's not precise enough. I decided, no, I didn't decide. I mean, Alfred Weber is the one that launched the term, but I immediately embraced it. That this term perfectly described all of the political aspects of the phenomena, whether it's what ETs, the politics of extraterrestrials, the truth embargo, its origin, and why it was maintained, who was involved, the process of getting to disclosure itself, the disclosure event itself. All of this is politics. And this is a big deal. This is not some trivial field. And therefore, it should have a term, exopolitics, which ultimately will be a subset of political science at universities around the world once the universities finally decide that maybe this is something they ought to deal with in a formal way, which they still haven't done, bless their hearts. And so it will be a subset, exopolitics. And again, it gave a context, and that has had its ups and downs over the last 20 years without question. It did not catch on to the degree I hoped, but nevertheless, it's not going away. And I still use it. I consider myself an exopolitical activist. And my coming podcast, The Disclosure Wire, will be about all things exopolitical. So it's about language. Now, within that context, obviously, there are differences of opinion, different approaches, and so forth. Great. That means it's vibrant, and you'll see a lot more. And there will be arguments, and there will be huge, well, you know it is, intellectual politics. But that's okay. So exopolitics is really what my work is about. It's what this podcast is about right now, this meeting. And that's where I put my time. So I'm pleased. I've done what I could to give it some substance. I created the Exopolitics World Network, which sort of still exists, but I may soon try to revitalize, and created a website for it. And so, I mean, a Facebook page. So, but that's all kind of, it's sort of broken down a little bit, and that's okay. But it can be revitalized. I believe that exopolitics will really come to life when the hearings begin.
Is the exopolitical thing, Steve, just as far as you're concerned, when you began the exopolitical conversation, how did that frame things differently than what you were doing personally?
That's part of a very key aspect of activism. I try to talk about this more and more. Language. Language is pretty important, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we communicate everything that we care about and do to others. And if the language is precise, then the results tend to be superior. Bad language can cause problems in almost any human endeavor, including activism. So one of the problems that the extraterrestrial phenomena genre has had since the earliest days was language. Terms were being put forward and almost forced on us by the government or by the press, and they were doing that either consciously or subconsciously to service the embargo, which has been in place since the July 9th Roswell Daily Record front page article about how Roger Ramey emptied the flying saucer, and they changed the story about the Roswell event. So UFO, RUPEL pushed that, unidentified flying object. It's a terrible acronym. It's not what this issue was about from day one. And as the evidence mounted, it became even more ludicrous. And of course, then the term itself became such a repository of ridicule that just using it or saying it locked you right into the intellectual ghetto that the government had created.
Why do you think it was? Why do you think it was so dysfunctional, that term UFO? Why did it become, in your view, so dysfunctional?
You had a phenomena, all right, sort of like atomic particles that people were becoming aware of and interested in and wanted to study, wanted to find out what's going on. Just like the atomic physicists were in the earliest days, were trying to understand the atom. Now imagine if the government somehow, some clever way, was able to put out a term that became essentially the key term for this research in atomic physics, called unidentified tiny particles. So if you're Bohm, or you're one of the Heisenberg, or any of these guys that are trying to understand or Marie Curie understand the atom, And the fundamental acronym that you're dealing with and is in the press and media and the books is unidentified tiny particles, UTPs. That's nuts. It's crazy. It just immediately demeans. So whatever you do, no matter how much evidence you amass, you're always studying unidentified tiny particles. And that's really what it turned out to be. So no matter how much evidence was amassed over the decades, the field was UFOs, unidentified. Well, if it's unidentified, I guess you haven't succeeded, have you? You haven't accomplished anything. You haven't got enough evidence there. It was embarrassing. But regardless, it also was the target for the ridicule. It wasn't just the phrase, it's the acronym itself. It was the fact that that's the ridicule target. They're gonna make fun of that, make fun of that, make fun of that. And so in the public's mind, they associate UFO, that simple acronym, with ridicule, silliness, and so forth. And boy, is that going to make it tough. You know, what, are you an astronaut? And you mention UFOs? Doesn't matter. Intellectual ghetto you go. If you're a physicist like Stanton Friedman, doesn't matter what your education level is, what your gravitas is. If you say UFO, then you're a UFO person. So that was a real problem. That's
so they commandeered the language, as you said earlier.
Well, they were going to service the language that serviced the truth embargo.
Exactly.
Right. They weren't going to refer to anybody back in those days as extraterrestrial phenomena researchers, because the government's position, there were no extraterrestrials. Which again, I'll use the same analogy. For whatever reason, the government, any government, took the position that there's no such thing as atomic particles. That used to be the case, by the way. They didn't know that there was atomic particles or atoms. And it's just, there's no such thing. And so whatever you're studying, it doesn't exist. Now, that would have been pretty outrageous, and most people would have been offended by that. But that's exactly what the government did with the issue of extraterrestrial craft, right? So and here's another example of language that served the embargo. Believer. Anybody in journalism that didn't like the subject or whatever was offended, and certainly anybody in government, they would be inclined to use the word believer. And so if you are studying this phenomena, if you're a Stanton Friedman, you're a believer. Right? Anybody that talks about this seriously is a believer. What the hell does that mean? If I have been impressed and convinced that Einstein's theories of relativity, special and general, very much describe the nature of the world, and I'm studying that and maybe even trying to write a paper about it, and somebody says, "What? You're a believer? You're a believer of relativity?" You tell a scientist that, and they will look at you very funny. So believer attaches the issue to a religious belief.
It's interesting, Steve, that you should mention the exopolitical perspective. That I'm not going to say it's divided, but it's provided a different avenue of understanding of what this whole issue is all about. And I know you and Francesco you were in Portugal for a while with him, and I know Francesco has some very definite views on how to not define, but how to frame disclosure internationally. So Francesco, I know you are eager to ask Steve a question about disclosure again.
Well, first off, thank you for having me, of course. Steve, always a pleasure to talk to you again. And my question is, because you, as have said during this interview, during this podcast, disclosure with the capital E, with the capital D, is the formal official acknowledgement of TET presence. But we know that there's still that chance, that big chance, that the way the soft disclosure is being conducted, it may result in the continuation of the process of disclosure, not achieving that formal acknowledgement, but still debating. We have still something here that is unidentified. It poses a threat. That's the narrative right now with the TTSA. There's a threat, but we don't know exactly where the origin of the threat. So even with possible hearings in April, is it possible that this process will continue for a long time? And imagine if not, imagine you have it with a capital D. Does your work as an activist end there? Imagine you have everything you ever hoped for in terms of the exopolitics activism. What is your next step? Are you going to retire and just thank God, or what's the future?
Okay.
Excellent question.
Good questions. This term soft disclosure, which has emerged, I'm not a big fan of it, though I understand its use. Essentially, soft disclosure is referring to the disclosure process, whether it's vigorous or less vigorous. So for the last 70 years, there have been just a huge history of effort to bring the information out, to learn about the phenomena, scientific research, which is part of the disclosure process, approaches to the government, and so forth and so forth. All of this has been the disclosure process, which eventually, starting, I think, really started after 2000, started to become a disclosure movement. Now, the movement naturally refers very much to the direct efforts to get the government to tell the truth. But the process continued. So while some of us are focused on the hard activism of getting the government to end this embargo, others are continuing to reveal information and do research, which is always adding to the disclosure process. And as with all activism, the goal was pretty simple. You have a goal. You have a goal, and then you try to get that. We call it the prize. In activists, it's called the prize. What is the prize? Now, if you don't have a prize in an activist movement, you got a serious problem. It's going to be very hard to keep things together, coalesce, and get people involved. Every activist movement has had a very well-defined prize. The extraterrestrial issue, certainly as you go back into 50s, 60s, 70s, did not have that. In fact, that prize really didn't emerge until late 1990s, early aughts. The prize is the event, the announcement, the confirmation, disclosure. That, in other words, these are extraterrestrial craft. So they are definitely identified. Now, does that mean we know the model number? Does that mean we know exactly how the controls work, or maybe even what planet they're from? That doesn't mean they're not identified. They're identified enough. And so that is the goal. It's always been that. So I'm not too, and that like every race, if you're running a marathon, if you keep moving in the proper direction, we know eventually you cross the finish line. This is exactly like that. There has always been a finish line, except unlike a marathon, the finish line could be moved. And the government has done that. It has moved the finish line over the years so that we couldn't quite get across it. But eventually that's going to end. And I believe soon. It is inevitable. There is no way that the truth embargo can simply exist indefinitely. Now, is it possible that even with hearings, the real deal, that somehow the embargo will survive it, and we'll still be in a don't really know, not sure mode? I can say no to that. Others might disagree, but I've got 23 years of experience with this, and I can tell you that the truth embargo will not survive proper hearings. And proper hearings would be much more extensive than the citizen hearing on disclosure, which was 5 days and 42 witnesses. It would be much more extensive than that. And the people testifying would be under oath and at risk of criminal charges if they lied, which of course was not the case in the citizen hearing. So if there are hearings next year, as I believe there will be, and those hearings are appropriate, meaning substantive, broad, multi-committee, and the military witnesses that I expect will be there are there will be disclosure. It will follow fairly quickly. And while I am an exopolitical, I rather disclosure activist now, after that event takes place, I will be a post-disclosure activist, and I will have a lot more to do, a lot more audience to talk to, and a lot more fun than I'm having now.
I think what you're saying, Steve, is, and I've always believed this, and I think you said this in one of the interviews that you and I conducted with Earl Bruce Knapp, and I believe you said this, that once all of this stuff kind of becomes common knowledge, as the Senate hearings are now with the placement of a new judge on the Superior Court in the United States, everybody's sort of all involved in that. And it seems now that what just might happen is that people like yourself and the Richard Dolans of the world and, Nick Pope and everybody, they're going to come running to you guys, literally running to you guys to say, we haven't really listened to you for the past 30 or 40 years, but I think that we need to listen to you now. And the array of issues that will come forward, the technological energy issues, the abduction aspect of this, the genetic manipulation, TTS and TTAS, the nuclear issue. They're going to come running to people like you to say, talk to us more about this because we are so uninformed about it. So what is the hierarchy that you see coming forward once all of this stuff comes forward with the hearings? What's the hierarchy of issues as far as you're concerned? That's a tough question, but
put this in some context. The final phase of the disclosure process will be pretty profound. It will surpass anything that we've ever seen by magnitudes. So let's assume hearings get underway and military witnesses, scores of them, who knows how many, begin testifying to various aspects of the phenomena under oath, and they're televised, and they will be. There may be some of the hearings will be very likely classified. In other words, they'll take some testimony if it's appropriate. That's fine. But the primary hearings are going to be public, you can be assured. The audience for those hearings will probably be greater than all of the audiences of all of the conferences and every other event we've ever held by magnitudes, 10 to the 5th power. We're talking hundreds of millions of people will watch these hearings. And it's hard to even grasp that number. And you may say, well, how? Well, the subject matter alone will draw huge numbers of people. But these hearings are going to take place in the age of social networking. And so the fact that these hearings are coming is going to be broadcast all over the world in terms of the anticipation for it as it gets closer. It's part of the job that I'm doing now, what we're doing right now. So Facebook, Twitter, everybody's going to know these hearings are coming. And they're going to be able to talk about it, right? Literally, real time. They'll be watching the hearings and tweeting people and corresponding and so forth. It will be the most incredible global dynamic event. Massive numbers. Okay, fine. So the world's attention will be galvanized, and we'll all watch the hearings together. Now, at some point, the evidence will be sufficient to allow the head of state, the hearings are in this country, it'll be our president, and members of the military intelligence community, DOD certainly, and the congressional committee chairs to get together and come to a consensus that clearly evidence that has been presented confirms the extraterrestrial presence. And I keep in mind that whatever evidence emerges in that testimony is on top of all of the evidence that's been amassed for 70 years by the citizen science research effort, right, which is not trivial, massive. And so, hey, done deal. And so now the president can now make the announcement in a very appropriate way. No one will be shocked or surprised, prepared. And there will be a lot less, it'll be politically more viable. It will be, everybody kind of looks a lot better than if we have some sort of surprise announcement. The Congress will be involved. The Department of Defense will be involved through the military witnesses. And so it's appropriate. It's responsible, the way to do it. And so the announcement comes. Now, that announcement thanks to the internet and broadband and all of that, will rocket around the world in minutes. And within a short amount of time, probably 90% of every living human being will know that the presence of these extraterrestrials has been confirmed. And other heads of state will immediately be following. There's just no way that they're going to sit silent. And so it's done very quickly. So what does that mean? It means that now 7 billion, 6.8 billion people have just been informed that there's an extraterrestrial presence, and they have a lot of questions about that. They have a great deal of interest. Who are they going to talk to? Okay, well, guess what? The citizen science research field at that moment will be the most logical place to go, and they will come.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes, there's going to be a need for experts. Absolutely. I could see, as you're saying, Stephen, they're going to be looking for people who have been looking at, studying it, when anything comes out, just to use the most recent, COVID-19 hits. And if you're an immunologist, all of a sudden you're on the news. How many people interview immunologists? How many immunologists have ever been on an interview? COVID-19 hits, you're all of a sudden in high demand. I could see something like this happening. But there's an aspect to this that does make you wonder. There's been a reason. And to me, it has always seemed it's got to have to do more than just the desire to keep technology hidden for the military industrial complex, for them to be able to increase their profits and increase their the value of their companies, or to have a competitive advantage over somebody else in their industry by dealing with the technology. It seems to me that this has always somewhat been a game of musical chairs, where you do not want to be that last person left without a chair facing the public explaining why you don't. It seems to me as though there's been something else behind this, and I don't know whether it's got to do with our, is there indeed, as has been suggested, a history of genetic manipulation that has occurred that has created us and who and why and what we are today? A subset of that, or a completely different aspect of it, could be the abduction phenomena and the examinations and the experiences that have gone on with it. It seems to me that there is something that is very provocative that sits there that nobody wants to be able to, or wants to be in a position to be the person that comes forward and says, yeah, me and all my predecessors for the last 70 years, and perhaps even longer than that, have withheld these very dangerous and disturbing facts from all of you. And it's more than just the technology. What do you see as the reality of that portion of disclosure versus the technology / they are here, they are real type disclosure you're talking about?
Your comments primarily are directed to the post-disclosure world, which I told you was going to be incredibly complex. So let's kind of step back to the origin point. Disclosure has taken place. All these billions of people around the world have now had that confirmed to them, and they really want to know more. So, and the journalists too. Of course, the entire journalism world, their hair will be on fire. Right? The biggest story of all time. Everybody's going to want a piece of the story. Okay, fine. Naturally, particularly with the journalist, their initial response is going to be to come at the government. And other people will be doing that. The population in general will be doing that. But in terms of getting information, generally, it's the journalists that go get it and then deliver it to the people. But on an individual basis, you'll have people all over the world calling up their representatives, whatever, trying to get information. That's where they're going to go. Well, as it happens, the government is in a very tough spot. It has no intentions of simply opening up the files and inviting everyone in. They're sitting on a massive classified reality, which covers a huge range of information regarding the ET issue, and they simply cannot do that. And so the government is going to have to push them back and say, look, okay, let's get in line here. We are going to provide information to you. Be assured of that. We can't provide it all at once. And there are things that are going to have to remain classified. And so we appreciate your patience if you don't mind. Well, okay, fine. That I expect that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I think that's what the government would certainly want to do. And I would be appreciative of that. The question is how much time are they going to hold off, and how many areas are they going to screen out, and so forth. However, once the journalists and the public have gotten that kind of pushback from the government, like, whoa, people, that's when they're going to turn to you guys and all of my colleagues that have had the good fortune to still be alive when this event takes place, and say, well, the government can't talk to us right now. What do you got to say? And I'm pretty sure that will happen, because thanks to the internet, all of the people in this field pretty much have a substantial presence that's easy to assess and find out about. Maybe some of them even got Wikipedia page. I used to have one, but they took it down. I'm working to try to get one up again. So they'll go to Wikipedia page for Stanton Friedman or all of the people. Of course, he's gone now, but Kathleen's not. And they'll probably go to Wikipedia if she got a page. And they're going to come at us. Yes, it's going to be extremely intense. And I can't wait. We'll have our day, as it were. Now, some of the people in the field will handle it well, some won't. Some of the people that might be approached are operating in areas that are pretty highly speculative. Whatever. I mean, it's going to be messy. To some extent, it'll be messy. That's okay. What's important is that finally, all of the work that the citizen science researchers have done will be laid before the vast the public, and they will learn from it. Meanwhile, the pressure on the government will continue. So you'll have that kind of going on in the early months, maybe even year or so of the post-disclosure world. And then there have the decisions in the citizen world have to be made. Do we form organizations? How do we coalesce in certain ways so that we have a more formal structure to be operating from in the post-disclosure world? Will substantial funding from private sources become available for the citizen scientists and researchers and activists to come together and have a voice, or not, will or not be? Right. Obviously, it's very hard to get funding for this field, always has, because of the ridicule and the truth embargo. Post-disclosure, totally different ballgame. So will we get the support that we need? We know the government's got all the money it needs to do whatever it wants. What about the citizens? And you got the corporate world. They're going to have their agenda, and they're going to jump in. And yes, one of the other things that will be happening is that a huge array of instant experts are going to turn up who have gravitas, high-level positions in colleges, research institutes, government agencies, and so forth. And they're going to raise their hand and say, I'm an expert, and you ought to be talking to me. Now, some of them may be experts, but they're secret experts, meaning they know a lot about it, but they never could say anything about it because they're under non-disclosure or security agreements. And I can appreciate that. And they may then suddenly be available, and people will say, well, we need to talk to that person. Of course, they'll still be restricted in what they could say. So they're going to be sort of hamstrung. We're not hamstrung. All of my colleagues, as far as I know, are going to say exactly what the hell they know and what they believe. They are not hamstrung in any way. And they'll talk about any project, and they'll talk about abduction. They'll talk about anything they wish to talk about, and the news will eat that up. But the government is hamstrung. It can't just go anywhere. But there will be this interaction between the entire citizen science research effort, corporations, the general public, journalists, who are all going to be our friends at that point. The journalists are going to finally go, oh boy, let's talk. Let's do some art. They want those stories. They want the Pulitzer Prizes. And so, yeah, the journalists will be on our side, and we'll have their full attention. And they've been getting better and better over the years. I feel I played a role in that. And so we'll have that. And this whole interaction will be going on, let's intensely, for a minimum of a year. And things will happen. Information will emerge. Policies may be suggested. There could be some laws passed. Institutions will form. Funding will, and hopefully it'll all work out so that we will be in a good place a year after disclosure. But don't underestimate the human race's ability to that constantly yank defeat out of the jaws of victory. We're still primitive in a lot of ways. But hey, all I can say is give us a shot. Give the human race a shot to engage this issue in all ways, you know, religion, business, science, and of course, politics, and change the world, hopefully for the better. That's what it all comes down to eventually. Now, this process will go on a year, 2 years. It will be intense. And me say, well, then what? Well, aside from how just the knowledge of disclosure will affect our worldviews, our thinking, our policies, then there is the possibility of open contact. I mean, the ETs, in fact, I've also said this, I think it's very possible and logical that if formal disclosure becomes worldwide, that the contact, I say abduction events will end. They will stop that. There's a lot of reasons why they might do that. But we know that that kind of contact is going on. Open contact is the next step, where they are not just dealing with a single individual as part of some program they're doing, but rather they're dealing with the society. They're dealing with us at the government level. How they would do that, I don't know. Skype, Zoom, maybe they'd even show up at the United Nations in person. I don't know, but whatever, it'll be open and it will be recorded. In other words, journalists will be telling us that ETs are saying this, we're saying that, and open contact is taking place. Now that is a whole nother level.
I can think that
there, then things go even more intense, and that will continue, and then for the rest of our lifetime. So I'm pretty optimistic about how cool it could be. But first, we have to get that announcement. Without that confirmation from the head of state, we're going to continue to just go around in circles without crossing the finish line.
I'm getting a sense, I'm watching Kathleen right now. And I don't know why I feel this, Kathleen, but I sense that you need to say something about Steve's comments a minute ago about how contact will portray itself. I'm just emotionally kind of tied to what you might be thinking right now. I think you might have a comment about that. Am I right?
The gears in my brain were working as I was processing.
Yeah, for sure. I could tell. I don't know why, but I could tell.
I have reservations, and that is because even among colleagues today, there are individuals who believe that there are no sentient beings visiting our planet. They believe that if these craft are manned, that it is through intelligent robots, artificial intelligence. And so that's what I was really thinking about. And how do you move from, post-disclosure, where we will be able to get beyond that denial and actually talk about sentient beings interacting with humans?
Yeah, what you've just described is a pre-disclosure assessment. There are a lot of pre-disclosure assessments, which are obviously not all correct. Some of them are directly opposed and haven't been resolved. In other words, these differences are not resolvable at this time. Why? Because of the truth embargo. The government still says there's no evidence for extraterrestrial presence. Well, obviously that's going to change very soon, and it's already changing. So again, let's leap ahead, Kathleen, to the disclosure event. The disclosure event has taken place, and the head of states of nations have confirmed that there's an extraterrestrial presence. Maybe that whole presence is biorobots. Okay, fine. But if those biorobots are indistinguishable from sentient beings, then hey, they're sentient beings. I mean, that's kind of where our AI is going anyway. But let's assume that they're not biorobots. The point is that they're extraterrestrial. They weren't made in a factory in China. They didn't grow up in the inner Earth. They're coming from other solar systems using advanced technology. That's now confirmed. All right, now let me add a little something to that, which I think you will appreciate. As I say, the journalists and the public are going to be coming at the government, and the government's going to have to say, hold on, folks. And then they're going to turn to us and say, well, the government can't say anything yet, but what you seem to know something about this. Talk to us. Okay, great. That's fine. But let me add one more thing. There is a hierarchy of disclosure that will take place. I'm pretty confident about this. In other words, if you look at the entire field, there are areas which will be fairly straightforward and the government can get into and provide information about. And then there's areas are much more problematic. So in terms of, I think a lot of the initial witnesses at the hearings will be pilots. We've exactly the kind of witnesses that the TTSA has been included in their 2-season show, Unidentified, 14 episodes, America's UFO Investigation. Don't be surprised if a lot of those same military witnesses turn up in Congress, but they have others. There are a lot of others. So sightings, very significant. That's easy to get into. Nuclear weapons tampering may come out pretty soon. You may see that early on because it's pretty well known. There's going to be some hard questions, so you could see that. But the two most difficult areas for the government to deal with, without question, is the extent of ET connected, derived, or re-engineered technology that the government has had in its possession, whether they've used it or not, and the abduction phenomena. Those are the two big ones. And of all of them, the abduction phenomena is the most difficult. They're not going to get into that. They will find a way to hold it off. I'm not sure how. It's going to be tricky, but they almost have to. Look, the full confirmation of the abduction phenomena by heads of state, that is going to unsettle some people, okay? And so they're going to put off that, and I don't blame them. What does that mean? Well, it means that, as I pointed before, the public is going to know about everything. And the abduction phenomenon is worldwide known. I mean, let's face it, there's alien abduction is a standard concept and meme known pretty much all around the world, and they're going to know about it, and government really can't get into it yet. So who are they going to go to? They're going to go to the contactees. And there are many known contactees, as we know. And they're all going to, and we're talking 7 billion people, right? A whole bunch of that 7 billion is going to want to talk to contactees, which is why I've said many times, contactees will be the rock stars of the post-disclosure world. In other words, get ready, keep your suitcase packed, because there are no unlimited number of lectures you can give, unlimited number of interviews you can give, because contactees, as far as the rest of the world is considered, are the most knowledgeable people about the ETs. They've been there, they've dealt with them, they've seen them, and they know something about them. And by the way, contactee researchers too. Oh boy, are they going to have some fun. And so you're going to see that happening. So right away, those, well, a lot of the key issues about ET presence are going to get resolved in that sense for the public's interest. In other words, they're going to learn from the contactees what they look like. We already have many renditions of what they look like on the internet right now, if you just know where to look. They're going to learn about what the interactions were like. They're going to learn about the genetic work and so forth. And this information will generally coalesce. That doesn't mean there are going to be some people that are going to pretend to be contactees and provide some ridiculous information. That's just human nature. But there are those contactees that have good reputations and are well known, that have good information, and that information will get out. And the world will start learning about the ET particulars from them before the government gives it to them, right? And that's going to be fun. So that's what you can expect, Kathleen. And I'm pretty sure that those that have these other views you discussed will quickly be on your side. They will come over to your side. Though again, this whole idea of biorobotic entities, I can't speak to that. I've talked to enough contactees and know enough about the evidence that I really don't think that we're talking biorobots. It's possible that maybe there is a biorobot component, but it's I believe a minority component. We're talking about beings traveling interstellar, just exactly as we will do when we have interstellar drive, and we're getting very close to it. So this whole idea we're going to send robots out first, hell with it. As soon as we have interstellar drive, you're going to have people lined up around the block 1,000 times wanting to be involved. Scientists and you can top people. Hey, I want to be on that ship. I want to be in that program. I want to go interstellar. And so this idea that other ETs are, no, they're not doing that. They're sending biorobots. I don't think so. Could they have invented biorobots? Yes. Could there be biorobots involved in some of this work? Not ruled out. But sentient living beings almost certainly are behind this phenomenon.
With that, Steve, with that, I think we should try to put a button on this for the sake of our viewers. But I do want to say something with respect to how you've moved through this conversation as an activist. And over the past 2 or 3 minutes, you're speaking as a futurist. And I think that that kind of information that you've been describing for the last few minutes is, once people listen to this podcast and watch it, it's going to blow the lid off their skulls. You're saying, my goodness, what is this man actually talking about? And as a futurist, you take a risk in talking about this. And so with that, I do want to thank you so much for exposing your knowledge and your soul and your deep emotional response to what this issue is all about, because make no doubt about it, as much as you have a foundational political and activist, bent on all of this, your emotional response to this, I think, is carrying us forward into a new realm of understanding of what this issue is all about. And I'd like to thank you so much for being part of this. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank Chris for helping us navigate through all of this. So, Stephen Bassett, thank you so much for being part of this, and we will let you know when this becomes the real world item on the New Frontier Network. Thanks very much, Steve, for joining us, and you take care of yourself.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.